Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today the Florida Gators might not need to fire their head coach after this year. What are we talking about? As you guys probably know, if you're watching this video, Billy Napier was coming into the season as the Florida Gators head coach on the hot seat. And he was basically everyone's betting favorite for any Power Four coach. So, like, hey, this guy is going to get fired because even though this might be the best Florida team that he has, Florida was facing what looked like a very impossible schedule. Was every list that you looked at did strength of schedule was listing this as the toughest schedule in all of college football. We thought that Billy Napier might get, the can as early as game one when Miami came into Gainesville, came into the swamp, slapped around the Florida Gators silly all game long. It wasn't even close, for a quarter. And then the third game of the season, they're playing Texas A&M. They also come to the swamp, push around Florida, destroy them. And at that point, we're like, all right, is Florida just going to go ahead right here, pull the plug, fire Billy Napier, and, start their coaching search, after their third game? Well, surprisingly enough, the Florida Gators decided to keep Billy Napier as the head coach. And all of a sudden, the Florida Gators starting to play some of their best football of the year. They beat Mississippi State a few weeks ago, which was a good sign, a good win in the right direction, even though Mississippi State might be the worst team in the conference. And then after that, Florida beats UCF handedly. Now that win doesn't necessarily look the best because UCF currently has 4 straight losses. But then just a week ago, Florida playing at Tennessee takes them to the wire, goes toe to toe, takes them to overtime. They lose, in tragic fashion. You could blame Billy Napier and some of his late game coaching decisions down the stretch for why they lost that game. But then Kentucky, a team that has kind of plagued Florida the last few years under the Billy Napier area, comes to the swamp, and Florida just beats the living crap out of them. They beat them 48-20. And now all of a sudden we're looking at Florida and their schedule right now. We're saying, hey, is there a chance this team is playing really hard? They seem like a team that has improved as the season has gone on. Could Florida actually not be in the market for a head coach after this season? I want Florida fans in the comments to let me know kind of what your vibes are right now. But it wouldn't surprise me right now if this Florida team goes 7-5. If you're looking at their schedule the rest of the season, obviously they have to play Georgia, Texas, and LSU 3 weeks in a row, but you do get LSU at home. Okay. And then you play Ole Miss at home. That game doesn't seem as daunting as it maybe did at the beginning of the season. And then you play Florida State, who is one of the worst Power 4 teams in all of college football. So I think there's a good chance that Florida can go bowling here, which I think we were all looking at Florida before the season like, hey, if they go 7-5 with this monstrous schedule, that is a pretty damn good year. That is, if you had a weak SEC schedule, you're probably going 9-3, maybe 8-4 if you had an easier SEC schedule. But I could see this team going 6-6 this year. But I do wanted to, I want Florida fans to tell me in the comments what they think is going on right now, because you guys obviously have a better pulse of the situation than what I have going on. But I do kind of want to do a because I at one point, I believe it was after Texas A&M game, I had a little thing on my whiteboard in my room here, and I wrote down all of the candidates for Billy Napier possibly to be replaced. And it's not just one of those generic, things that like Bruce Feldman does anytime a coach gets fired, where he just basically copy and pastes the coaches that he's done for every other, big job that's gotten hired. I actually had a realistic list for Florida fans. So even if you don't necessarily like where this video has been going so far, make sure you subscribe. And if Billy Napier does get fired, we will do a video talking about potential replacements for Billy. So please subscribe if you would like to see that. So I did want to do like just a little bit of a list here of like pros and cons of firing Billy Napier. And I just kind of wanted to talk about that because this is kind of like a new, interesting kind of hiring cycle that we have here in college football that is more unique than we have ever had in the past. So let's start off with the pros of firing Billy Napier. the biggest pro, I think, of firing Billy Napier after this season, and this is something we talked about in the summer, talking about, the current state of coaches in college football. All of these big schools uh, have gotten to the point where we got into like a crazy hiring spree like the last 2 or 3 years in the sport, where they have just every new coach that they've gotten, one, they've been stealing coaches from other teams, and they have also, in order to steal coaches from good jobs to take them to their job, they have had to give them like insane amounts of money and insane amount of protection for their deals. So all of these guys that got signed, even like a Lincoln Riley at USC right now that's struggling, he signed a 10-year contract and his like buyout right now is like 80 something million dollars. So Lincoln Riley's going to be at USC for a little bit, even if he is struggling right now. Brian Kelly at one point looked like he was, maybe in a little bit of some hot water at some point for LSU, even though they're playing really, really good right now. But his buyout's going to be, really huge. So all these other schools have gotten to a scenario here where they have their coaches under huge, huge contracts for a long period of time. So if you're looking at the possible jobs in this hiring cycle, if Florida does indeed fire Billy Napier, Florida is going to be the best head coaching job available out of anyone else in the country, unless there's some unforeseen scenario where, where Ohio State fires Ryan Day or Michigan fires uh, Sharon Moore or somebody else like retires randomly. It looks like right now Florida would be the number one head coaching job. So dissimilarly to like what you guys had to deal with in, what was it, 2021, when you originally hired Billy Napier, you didn't have to worry about competing with LSU for a coach, or competing for USC for a coach, or Notre Dame for a coach, or any other school. I think did Mel Tucker get hired that year too for Michigan State? So you don't have to worry about getting into a bidding war with other coach or with other schools and having potential candidates potentially picking other schools over you. You basically have the pick of the litter of anyone that might be looking to make a jump into a bigger job, whether that be a coordinator, whether that be a Big 12 coach, an ACC coach, or a any sort of G5 coach out there that might tickle your guys' fancy. So I think that is a huge pro for Florida right now. The biggest reason people that Florida might actually fire Billy Napier is because, from, again, Florida fans, fill me in, it looks like you guys have kind of cut off some NIL funding to recruits. So the pro of that, if you fire Billy Napier, is you might have like this influx of like huge NIL spending coming in from a lot of your guys' boosters and your fans, because that might invigorate the fan base and might create new excitement, and you guys might actually be able to get some transfer portal guys and some recruits that you maybe aren't getting right now under Billy Napier, because I think his current class for 2025 right now doesn't necessarily look the most sharp. Okay, let's get into the cons. And this is where Florida fans are going to get mad at me. First off, there is this financial issue. Again, I don't know Florida's financial situation, where they're at, how much they want to spend on a coach, whether they're going to be, really, maybe desperate's the wrong word, but I would call it desperate, and, give somebody $100 million contract for 10 years. You're going to have to obviously make that financial investment, because you're going to have to increase your NIL spending probably after this. You're going to have to pay Billy Napier's buyout. You're probably going to have to pay all of the assistant coaches' buyout. And then you're also going to have to pay for a new head coach and a whole new staff. So obviously there's a bunch of financial, things here where you might not want to fire him just for that. But we know how college football goes. Most of the time we don't care about money and paying coaches buyouts. That's just how the sport has gone over the recent, decade or decade and a half or so. Here's a con. Coaches might look at Florida as a not great job, because if you look at the history of Florida, really the two coaches that have had success there, at the success that Florida wants to have, is Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier. Other than that, it's been a bunch of meh. That's really what it's been. And I also think this too. There's a lot of coaches that are happy where they're at. There's a lot of coaches in the Big 12 right now that are happy where they're at. and they don't want to go to a situation like a Florida, like an Auburn or an SEC job. I'm not even saying Florida does this. I'm just saying, just in general. There's certain jobs in college football where if you go there, boosters that give a lot of money to, athletic facilities, to NIL budgets, to the athletic department, want to have influence, want to have sway. And those people can be very powerful voices, and they at times think they want to run the program. And there's a lot of coaches out there that are turned off by programs by that. And they don't want to have other people come in and, try to have them run the, Florida program the way they want it to be run. They want to come in and run the program the way they want to run it. Okay, I think that was kind of an issue you guys had with Dan Mullen a little bit, where Dan Mullen, wasn't necessarily trying to get top 5 recruiting classes every single year. You guys had a problem with that. So I think that's one. And also, two, a lot of people might look at Billy Napier only getting 3 years to be the head coach of Florida and might just say, hey, look at that schedule. That's a pretty tough schedule. And you guys fired him after only 3 years. I don't want to go to a job where I'm not going to have that much security. Now, the inverse to that would be like, hey, well, they're going to give him a 10-year, $100 million contract. So that would be the security to have the new coach coming in, run the program. It doesn't have to be 10 years, 100 million. It could be like 8 years, 70. I don't know what the numbers. I'm just throwing out numbers just, for the sake of an argument here. So that's obviously a con. Obviously, this happens anytime you have a head coach leave. You could lose some very good players, DJ Lagway being one of them. I've really enjoyed watching him the times that he has been able to play for Florida. I think he's an absolute stud, and I think you guys, found an absolute gem in that guy. I really, really like DJ Lagway and the way he has been playing for Florida. So you could, because you could say what you want about Billy Napier. You can, pick your holes with the roster and his coaching decisions. But I actually think there's like a decent amount of talent on this Florida team here. And like I said earlier, if you guys had an easier SEC schedule, there's a world where maybe this Florida team wins 8-9 games. Here's a big one. And I think this is something that no one's really thought about. Because of the new 12-team college football playoff, there might be a lot of coaches that might not be able to leave their job. Because you're going to have 12 teams make the playoff. And usually when these hiring situations happen, it happens like late November, early December. And if you have, some coaches, whether that be assistants or head coaching candidates that might be on a playoff team, it's going to be kind of hard to kind of work out the logistics of hiring them, because even if it's like a head coach of a team, let's say you do take a Big 12 school or whatever's head coach, or if that's who you want, well, what happens if they're in the playoff and they're coaching, they don't want to leave their playoff team, right? So the best candidates might not actually be available because of this new 12-team playoff for your hiring cycle and when you need to make a hire. So I don't know. That's another factor here that I thought of. Okay, here's another argument that I have. Like we have seen with this Florida team so far earlier this year, and how this team has grown over the season and how they have improved, because I think this team has really improved, and I do think there's talent on this roster. I don't think this is like a talent issue with Florida. Now you could say decision-making stuff with Billy Napier and, strategy situations with Billy Napier. I get that stuff. But is there a chance that maybe this team is a year away from having a pretty solid season under Billy Napier? And if you fire him, you're basically in a whole new kind of rebuild, restart. And maybe it's a year too early to fire Billy Napier. Would you rather fire him a year too early or a year too late? So that's another thing I thought about here. Maybe this team comes out next year. Maybe they get a little bit of an easier schedule, and maybe this team can, take a step in the right direction, attract more recruits, attract more NIL funding, and just work on becoming a better overall team and program. So that's another thing I thought of. But yeah, those are my pros and cons of hiring or firing Billy Napier. I think it's probably the case that he is a lame duck. I don't know how he's going to get through the rest of the schedule, having to play 3 top 10 teams 3 weeks in a row, one being neutral site, one being on the road, and then one obviously being at home to wrap all of that up. Is a pretty tough hill to climb. But hey, man, if they go 3-2 to finish out the season, or even 2-3, I could see him staying. I could be wrong. Florida fans, fill me in the comments. But yeah, there you have it, guys. That's going to do it for this episode here today. If you liked what you saw here today, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Like I said, if Florida does eventually do a firing of Billy Napier, we're going to do a video kind of going over all of the possible candidates that I think could replace him, and we're going to go through a huge list if that's the case. So make sure you subscribe so you can have easier access to our channel, and obviously help support the show. It costs you absolutely $0. And feel free to check out the rest of the Sports Detective Podcast channel page. You might find some other videos here that you like. So thank you very much for watching. We'll talk to you next time.